Brickell, and the proximity to Brickell, which is here, and the downtown. There's a huge interest in recreational cycling, which was the initiating component for that. And this is the most popular ride in the entire state of Florida. As we went through it, along with my colleagues at the Underline and Ludlam Trail and Commodore Plaza, et cetera, we've been developing this idea that we want to create a biking pathway that is a loop that allows access to the beach, access for recreation and fitness to the quay, and as well as commuting. And then also these other lines are the other programs that are in place. This is a photo from the animation, and what I thought I would do is begin with the animation. Hopefully it works. Show you the end game in my mind, and then take you through the process of how we got here. And with that in mind, that would enable us to talk about how this all happened. So hopefully on the screen you see the animation. This is something we put together, which I'll show you later in the presentation, is inspired by the good work that I've seen in Northern Europe, in the Netherlands, in Copenhagen specifically, of this idea of a great separated biking highway that allows for unimpeded and safe use. The issue really came about with the idea of so many of the cyclists being injured, and unfortunately quite a few being killed on the road while they're trying to do, fitness. Like Rick mentioned, I got involved out of our New York office early on with the Fit City program when we were working on a housing project in New York, and was totally inspired by the idea that we not only had a program manager from zoning, but we had one from public health. And I brought that idea to Cheryl in Miami, and we created some projects here on our own, and wanted to follow the lead of New York here in Miami with trying to develop a Fit City program. Obviously, this is about fitness, but it's much more about the idea of a grade separated. As you can see on the screen, the bike goes up and we come through in a vehicle. So there are several issues here we're trying to solve. One is the resiliency, and if you've been reading the paper, you know that we're getting underwater a lot quicker than most people think. This is the most vulnerable causeway in all of Dade County. It will be underwater first beyond anyone else, any of the other causeways. So by moving the road and creating this project, we're actually creating 20 additional acres of waterfront park with no acquisition cost. The reason the project is fundable is this bridge coming on the screen, which is the proposed new Bear Cut Bridge. If Miami was hit directly by a hurricane, this bridge, which connects Key Biscayne to the city, would be washed out, just like the ones you saw in Sanibel last summer. So that was maybe a prescient moment, because what enables the funding, which I'm going to explain later in the presentation, to happen is that this bridge absolutely needs to be replaced, but there's no funding for it. I found funding through a private fund that would do it through raising the tolls that already exist by someone. The idea of the project, though, is really also stimulated by this safety program of creating biking and pedestrian and runners to provide them a safe location for being able to manage traversing the quay. It's also spectacularly beautiful. It's one of the best rides anywhere, I believe. The inspiration was Copenhagen's bike bridges, spending time in New York, and see what the Bloomberg administration did with taking a city as congested as New York and putting in the bike lanes, and especially the Brooklyn Bridge, which is so narrow but used extensively. Also Canada, Vancouver, as I travel, I'm always looking for what are the cities doing, and I'm trying to bring those lessons back to Miami. And here in the end is a proposed connection to the underline so that you could literally be anywhere in the system and be able to be safe and separated from the vehicles. So what we're doing is, I want to take you through process, because in the spirit of the visit of your students, I'm trying to make this a teachable moment and learn from the lessons that we've already learned from here. So in the beginning, it was advocacy in 2012, and all that we really wanted out of that was to prevent deaths. And the way that I thought about it was, let's take the lanes, let's try and do something with reducing them, and at least go ahead and put in some green paint so you can see where the bike path is. These are ghost bikes that we have here in the city. Unfortunately, these three names have now doubled since I've been trying to get this off the ground. And ghost bikes are all too familiar everywhere, but Miami is one of the worst cities in the country to be a cyclist. So the initial idea, I'm taking you through the 2012 to 2015. This was just an idea about, let's do something right away. This is the before, showing the entry to the causeway. And then the after was, we have so much paving, let's just take some of it, plant some trees, create a bike path, and make it safe. It's a little more complicated on the causeway itself. So the proposal was to take a lane and devote that lane to cyclists and runners, because as you go out to the quay, you'll see in the future slides, we have 2 lanes, which eventually 3 lanes here, which over the bridge makes 2 lanes, goes back to 3 lanes. And then when you get to Key Biscayne itself, you have a long 2-lane path. If you see the hand that I have on the screen, this is all 2 lanes. It starts out as 3. So my thinking is, if it's 3 to 2 to 3 to 2, why not just make it 2 and let that space be available? And I asked some of my friends in the consulting engineering business to help, and we came up with this presentation that we made to the county, where we actually created a simple design and came up with a price estimate of $1.5 million to just do this, which is to reduce the lanes to 2, paint the striping green. And unfortunately, by the time they did it, it was years later, because they didn't take the money out of the general fund. They decided to have a transportation grant pay for the green paint, which in my mind was not the right move. As I carried this around throughout the county, meeting with commissioners, going to, complete streets meetings and the bicycle advocacy community that we have, I entered what I call stage 2, which was philanthropic, because we took this in as a project in the firm. And the idea was that we were going to just pay the costs related, aside from the time related, to answer what one of the commissioners told me. He said, Bernard, if you're going to get something like this through, we want something iconic. We want something bigger. To talk about making changes in the roadway is not getting anybody very excited. So I said, okay, let me take it to the next step. So the next step was from 2015, for 2 years, we created this presentation explaining that the causeway did in fact start as a landfill project for a highway to develop Key Biscayne as a residential zone, but that the area in orange on the map is actually classified in the same functional classification as US 1, which is a major arterial highway. So we said, maybe it should become more of a local road and not an arterial highway, because what it does do is it connects what is essentially Miami's Central Park. These are all the recreational activities and locations. And when you begin to look at it, we really have in this green here, this is Virginia Key. This one is Key Biscayne. The village is in the middle where the gray is, and then Cape Florida is a state park. When you add it all up, we have 2,000 acres of park. It's really Miami Central Park, and Grace Perdomo, who's been helping me with the presentation, mentioned to me yesterday that New York City was 843 acres. So this is actually a road that connects 2.5 to 3 central parks. And as I take you further into the project, you'll see that this becomes one of the key elements. Here's the inspirational image from Copenhagen. If you've been there, you know that they don't think twice about spending money for infrastructure to support bicycle movement. 50% of the community in Copenhagen commutes by bicycle. So here's a blow up of coming in through through Brickell over to the park. This is the initial island. Then here's the main bridge, the large bridge, which people love to go over. And then the idea was to carry this facility all the way over to Key Biscayne. This is Virginia Key on the map. And the idea was to replace the Bear Cut, improve all of this on Virginia Key, and basically create a new bridge strictly for bikes and runners across the bay. We did a major exhibition at the Coral Gables Museum. I got to say that was a lot of fun. You can see me on the right with Surya, and I'm obviously a very happy guy because we pulled off the exhibition. It was really very cool. On the left slide, we actually put the length of the bike lanes on the floor, which is 30 feet wide. It would be actually the widest bicycle facility, to my knowledge, anywhere in the country. And here we have the homage to the fallen cyclists and the fact that we need to make Miami a safer city. So this was the presentation that I carried around to the public entities to explain that, number one, it's about safety. Number two, it's about moving the road, elevating it, and creating a new road that is 2.5 feet higher than the current causeway. Here's the bike lane and a brand new open space. This is the new bike bridge in orange, which has an observation deck as part of it. Here you can see more slides. Here's a close-up of the observation, because one of the things that happen is when people get to the top, everybody wants to stop because this is a view of Miami's downtown. It's pretty spectacular, really. And then the recreational space and the Bear Cut Bridge replacement. So from a Google Earth photo, this is what it looks like today, still, except there is some green paint on the edges. And the idea was we're going to increase the size of the park, move the road over, raise it, and be able to solve all our problems all at once. So the before is this, the after is that. We have 20 acres. Actually, when we analyzed it, it's more like 28 acres of new waterfront park that would be redesigned. And from a resiliency standpoint, the hurricanes that seem to be increasing in ferocity as well as time, this is the first barrier to the waves and the surge. And by raising the road, we would really do a lot of good, not only for the causeway, but it would also protect the downtown. During the course of this process, we came up with, this is maybe the most amazing thing. During the course of the project, we were acting like we normally do as consultants, designers, trying to figure this out. But along the way, I met some people that I wanted to have look at the project, because if I'm designing new bridges as an architect, I went to an engineer and said, would you please check this out, make sure I'm not crazy. And the response came back that, no, you need to add a column here and there, it looks pretty good. But the main thing is, I think I have a funding source that would be available to help you build the project. So once that became viable, we started looking more seriously at the idea that we could invite the best of the best. And I went to New York with Jack Cardis, who was my buddy and colleague with the funding source. And we did interviews and selected Hargraves Jones as the landscape firm to help us understand not only the new park, but also the resiliency issues. So from the standpoint of the resiliency, here is a very conceptual sketch of the new park. We actually found out we have 28 acres. And as we began to look further, they started thinking of how to divide up this park into something that would be much more special, much better than the renderings that we had done before it became a real project in our minds, and how we would connect to the school, the rowing club, the marine stadium, the restaurants. This is really a major entertainment hub for the city. But then they discovered that when they started looking at the charts, this area in yellow are actually the perfect depth for an artificial reef. So we were thinking that we would submit to the county as a competitor, because we can't just do the project. They had to do an RFP, which they did eventually. And we were using this as one of our extra added bonuses, that we would come in as part of the project and develop an artificial reef that would give additional protection to the causeway and also downtown, which is right up here. So we went through and spent a lot of time with the community, all kinds of different stakeholders, with basically this concept. We're going to create a project that's safe, and it's going to be multimodal. It's going to be better for the driver, better for the cyclist, better for the runner. Micro-mobility is part of it. We're going to be creating the new park and access that is going to connect all 2,000 acres of parkland. We're doing one of the main objectives of the nonprofit is to convert infrastructure into open space. So that is my mission. That's what I'm trying to do with the nonprofit. And this was going to be the first example of that. And it was going to be a massive new project that was going to be fully funded without governmental expense. We were proposing to introduce aspects of resiliency. And then finally, Key Biscayne, which is a very, very affluent community, is at the end, but everybody uses this, the entire county. We have people of all economic groups, as you might expect, just like Central Park in New York. Everybody and so many of the different facilities are out once you come out over the bridge, that the equity of being able to do something for everyone was really a big part of it. In fact, part of the proposal that we were sending to the county was that we would provide a shuttle between the rapid transit rail stop at Vizcaya. For those who come by transit, they would be able to be picked up by shuttle and brought out to the parks as a way of helping those with more modest means access the recreational activities. So once we had money, we said, let's get serious about how we do this. So this is the public-private partnership, which in my mind is the most important part of the result of all this, what I call philanthropic nonprofit effort, is that we actually found the money. So this was P3 2017. We started walking the halls of the county. The administration at the time was very supportive, and we were trying to put together everything we needed in order to do what's called an unsolicited proposal to the county for the project. So we formed a team, which now included the funding. We socialized the idea everywhere, including the village of Key Biscayne. We went throughout every commissioner and mayor in the county government, which owns the causeway, to tell them we're getting ready to submit a proposal. And then act of God, I don't know what to call it, this immense tragedy happened in March of 2018 when the FIU pedestrian bridge collapsed. And unfortunately, the engineering construction team that had been helping me all along were implicated in the bridge, which was known to everyone in the political environment. And the bridge collapse resulted in many deaths, and it was a tragedy for the community, but it was also a tragedy for our efforts, because the day that the bridge collapsed, I was making a presentation to the overall parks community, telling them that when the next month we were ready to submit our proposal, and then my phone rang off the hook, and there was no way to submit the proposal with the team that I had, because they were now implicated in this tragedy. So that put an end to that. And everything stopped. I just went into hibernation for 2 years between 2018 and 2020, until I created a new team with a new funding source. Everything about it was new except for the concept. The concept was still the same. We wanted to revitalize it. So the county finally in 2020 began seriously understanding we were doing our unsolicited proposal. We were coming forward. Everything was brand new. We had all the money. So Plan Z could be accomplished. And I think these are the major takeaways. No risk to the county. All of the construction risk, including cost overruns, are borne by the funding source. An immediate completion, 3 to 4 years. Well, how can we do a project in 3 to 4 years when it takes 15 or 20 years to do it through the governmental process? And the reason is, if you use no public money, you still need the NEPA and the other environmental studies, but you can be doing everything simultaneously. We could be doing the underground surveying, we could be doing the NEPA study, we could be doing the engineering, we could be doing many things, because by providing private money, we can skip a lot of steps and go right to the process. So 3 to 4 years, we would be able to design it, get it approved, and build everything all at once. Minimal toll impact after the completion. So we explained to the county that the toll would not go up until the project was complete. It would be iconic and world-renowned for the county to be suddenly on the forefront of doing this kind of infrastructure. No property tax, and because they keep repairing the bridges to prevent them from falling down, we would actually pay the $50 million in bonds that the county owed, and we would provide the county an additional $40 million in cash for other county priorities that we knew were needed. So we proposed this non-P3 qualifying, that's just the terminology to meet the county and the state law. We proposed 2 causeways. Why? Because the Venetian Causeway, which is still waiting for its repair after 17 years, is also owned by the county, and we proposed to the county initially we would take over both causeways. That would create more efficiency and an economy of scale, and we would then be able to repair the Venetian Causeway along with replacing a lot of what we were doing for Rickenbacker. Included was a 99-year replacement of the Powell Bridge, that's the high bridge, which eventually needs to be repaired and replaced, and maintaining all the infrastructure. So this is a job for people for the next 100 years. It's a classic public-private partnership where the operation is handed over to the private entity to take care of it. We would be able to collapse all the phases, do it all at once, defease the bonds, and discuss the proposed tolls. So, since I'm an architect and not a financial guy, but I was very involved in understanding, the overall project is a $400 million project. And because of the time frame of the concession, we could do everything you've seen for between $1.50 and $2 an additional toll, which means $100 million worth of capital improvement results in a 50-cent toll increase, which meant for every dime, we can build $20 million in project cost, which is why eventually the proposal included not only the infrastructure changes, but also the creation of the new 20-acre park built out with best-in-class landscape designers in the world. And I was beyond happy because we were in process. I was working with the engineers. The RFP was out there. We were a competitor, except that the village, which was going to benefit, and I'm listing this slide, which we showed the village, they're going to have the Bearcut Bridge replaced. They're going to have an HOV lane so they don't have to bother with waiting when there's an event, which is their biggest issue. They have a minimal toll increase. They pay $24 a year if you live on the Key, and everybody today pays $275 to go there when they pay the toll. So we were going to raise their rates to $40 a year, which is like nothing. Pedestrian bridge for the school across to the park so the kids are not crossing the roadway. Cyclists go into Crandon Park, improve access for kids to ride their bike to school, safety, new lighting, public transportation to carry people from the rail to the parks, and a special event planning that would be handled by the concession contract that we were trying to win. Key Biscayne said they loved everything except what they wanted was that we should put the proposal together in such a way that instead of this being the plan, that we should create new overhead highways. As you can see here, this is a sketch that I did to show them what they were really looking to do, which I thought was not something I'm willing to do. And they said, yes, exactly. So this is a photo of a bridge that's now being replaced in downtown Miami, I-395. A lot of money went into creating something beautiful and extraordinary, extra high, sculpted columns, all of that. And I said to the Key, this is nonprofit. I'm not doing this for you alone. I'm doing it for the whole county. And I'm not going to take a barrier island and put an overhead highway on it because everywhere else in the country, they're tearing them down. So that's a non-starter for me. And we're the ones producing the unsolicited proposal. And at that point in time, they developed a scheme of misinformation, using words like privatized and set up no bid, all these kind of negative things that they rallied the Key Biscayne community around. All of the resistance came only from Key Biscayne. And the city of Miami passed a resolution endorsing the plan. Key Biscayne voted unanimously to tell the county to stop the RFP. And eventually that's what happened. The RFP was stopped pretty much 50 to 60% through. We had another 2 months and we would have been able to present this to the county and spend hundreds of millions of dollars making an incredible new location for safety and a model, I think, for the whole country. But it got stopped and we've been licking our wounds ever since, between the first pass where the bridge fell down and the second pass where we ran into trouble with a very affluent community that insisted that they have their overhead highway home because they don't want to be bothered with having to stop anywhere. So we said, okay, let's figure out where we go from here. But in the meanwhile, when I showed this to Rick and his students the other day, and I got invited to do this, I thought, well, what have we learned? And where do we go from here? Well, one thing I've learned is I'm absolutely convinced that with all the infrastructure needs that we have, when government is able to do it, great, but government is in gridlock everywhere. And the P3 is still the best. And I think the only way to get major works done, because there's so many points of irritation as you go through socializing something. There's always someone who's going to be unhappy, and people back off from it, as we've learned. But I don't think that a project like this can ever be done in our country through government alone. The most that'll get happen is the bridge will be replaced at some point in time, probably after it falls down, and the key will have to take ferries to get home. But the point is, I'm not interested in building a bridge. I'm interested in creating infrastructure into open space. So building the overhead highway was just a non-starter. The other thing we've learned is we need to have more robust social media so that we can counter the fake news and the misinformation, because social media, as we all know, can be a force for good. But unfortunately, when there's a momentum building with any one group that is against it, they're able to mobilize enough activity in social media that it seems like the world is falling apart. We had basically 1% of the population of the county stop this project. 99% is everyone else who lives in the county that would have benefited. Which leads me to the final conclusion, which is that politics, unfortunately, is reactive. As we say here, it's a road to nowhere, because the courage and the effort that it takes to support an idea against resistance seems to be an impossibility for us at this moment in time. And we have to figure out, as we move forward to the next iteration of this project, or a new project that I will think of, we have to figure out a way to kind of neutralize the political backlash from naysayers in order to actually have a chance of using the money to create something that most people believe would have been a spectacular solution. So to kind of wrap up, I showed you the video up front because I wanted you to see the kind of the image of what we were proposing, but decided to take you through the unfortunate and lengthy journey that we've been through, those of us who support this idea, and where we are now, just to illustrate what a process it's been. And with that, I'm not sure, Chitra or Rick, who's in charge, but happy to take questions and continue the conversation.
Thank you, Bernard, for extraordinary presentation. You're in charge, but our format is very simple. People in the audience who have a question for you can direct that to the Zoom chat room or Q&A room. I see in the chat room already one comment from Chitra that talks to that process. I'll select them, read them off, maybe combine a few, shorten them. We don't give the microphone to people partly for efficiency and to try to make sure that the questions are pertinent to the topic at hand. But we do attribute the questions, and we have people in the audience from all over the U.S., many from New York, but a few I see from Miami, even someone writing in from the Ozarks today. Cool. All that to say, hello, Susan. All that to say, I have a few questions that necessarily kind of start with the lessons learned, working backwards. And the politics attendant to forming a P3 that can proceed. Before that, though, I was just kind of curious about the scale, because 2,000 acres is a phenomenal amount of green space to have access to and augment. In New York, the Staten Island Greenbelt, which we think of as enormous, is 1,778 acres, smaller than that. Van Cortlandt Park, much larger than Central Park, is only 1,146 acres. Coincidentally, Van Cortlandt Park is the same distance from Columbia University, where I am now, as Key Biscayne is from Brickell. Just over 7 miles, 7.8 miles. You're saying. So the scale of being able to get to some place like Jones Beach State Park, which is 37 miles from Wall Street, by bicycle, and relieve, just creating opportunities for people who are stuck in the offices in Brickell or living in downtown Miami now to be able to get to such a beautiful part of the world, which they can't easily do now, is a starting point. So the financing and the newspaper headlines that you've showed very quickly. I was trying to read some of those articles, the negative articles last night, to try to see, what was the nature of the response. And as you say, it was a lot of misinformation or bizarre interpretations of what privatization was. Misrepresentation of toll increases and the risks. But I think there was something in what you said that, thinking of Jones Beach State Park and the height of the bridges and the issues of class and race and politics that prevented free and easy public access by bus to Jones Beach State Park in New York in the day of Robert Moses, improved public transportation assets to reduce traffic. Seeing that as an advantage for people who are tied to their cars, whether they're electric cars or otherwise, that there's less traffic because there's public transportation. And also the special event planning that might bring people who weren't usually coming to Key Biscayne. And with that, called to mind were all the issues, decades ago in Georgetown about, not allowing public transportation, not allowing the Washington Metro to continue to Georgetown, such an obvious necessity for fear of people who weren't of that neighborhood getting there easily. That NIMBYism, that lack of access directly counter to your proposal, which was, in my mind, and from what my students said after their presentation last time as well, for everybody, including the people who might not have seen it to their benefit. So I was trying to get a sense, not really being a Floridian, of what the local politics were outside of Key Biscayne. There was a great article about the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, stepping up in the middle of last year with a strong endorsement.
Right.
Then you have Daniela Levine Cava for the county, right, for Miami-Dade.
Right.
Different political parties, both more moderate than many of their colleagues. There was no way of overriding the Key Biscayne NIMBYism that you're saying derailed the project, at least in 2022.
Well, I mean, if you're familiar, I'm not sure New York has this, but in Miami, there's something called a cone of silence. Once the RFP is issued, you're not allowed to talk to anyone that is in public office about we are not allowed to talk to anyone about it because we're now a proposer. In this case, they actually went further to make sure that we were not allowed, based on our attorney's interpretation, we were not supposed to talk to the press or put our opinion out there, because that would be seen as lobbying and might be construed as inappropriate. And therefore, even if the project was awarded, we would be liable for lawsuits that said that we did something inappropriate. So we really threaded the needle on making sure we did nothing that could be interpreted as undue influence. So if we were allowed to speak to the press, which our funding source was not anxious for us to do. So our funding source is a group out of Switzerland called Partners Group. And I think this will be interesting for those listening, because the conditions that allowed this to be funded were really interesting and unknown to me until, by some quirk of luck, I checked all the boxes somehow with this project. The first one was that Partners Group is willing to fund public-private partnerships for infrastructure, but not if they are federal or state. So what that means is municipally owned, county-owned, community-oriented infrastructure is what their mission is as a funding source, because federal and state means the project's going to take decades and they don't want to invest in projects where the outcome is not more predictable. The second thing is all of the land that is contained within the proposed project needs to be owned by one entity, in this case, the county, and we check that box. So the actual right-of-way for the roadway is entirely 100% county owned. And the reason that's important is they don't want to get involved in committing funds to a project that might be tied up in court because somebody doesn't want to sell their land. And the third one was because they need to be paid back for the investment, they wanted to make sure that whatever they invest in is already a tolled facility, so that what we're talking about is increases, not taking a road that's free and charging people to use it. So their typical projects are highways and private bridges and things like that they do all over the world. They're over $100 billion committed to these types of projects. Even today, they've told me if there's a way for me to figure out how to put this back, this is the single most desirable project for them, because not only do they get an infrastructure improvement out of it, they get the resiliency, they get a new park, they get open space, they get community benefit. So from their brand, this is the kind of project they want to be involved in, which is why it was such a spectacular opportunity. The reality is that probably out of the $400 million, probably a third of it maybe is the replacement of the Bear Cut Bridge, because there has to be some urgency, otherwise they can't justify spending the money, which means 2/3 of it is in the creation of the new bike bridges, in the creation of the resiliency, moving the roads, solving sea level rise, all of those things, which they said they can justify as long as there's some element there that requires the urgency. So the point was, we never really had a chance to explain all that because we were prohibited from talking to anybody. And meanwhile, the key, as you read in the articles, there were allegations that we're going to build high-rise towers along the roadway, that we're going to have, commercial, places of restaurants and all kinds of commercial uses. All of that came from a misinterpretation, to be kind. I think it was really a way to kill the project so they could mobilize people around what they turned into a bad word, which is privatization. Privatization is just meaning that the money is coming from private sources. And even had we completed the project the way the RFP was written, we would have public outreach as a requirement so that we could get public comment about the succeeding bidder of who wins the project, whether that's us or somebody else. I even went to the point of talking to members at the Key before the RFP that I would put in an alternative project which had their overhead highway as a way of appeasing them, so that, look, we'll put together this RFP to do all this replacement. One solution will be at grade the way we've designed it. An alternative will be an elevated roadway the way you would like it. And then during the year of public comment, we'll give the commission an opportunity to pick the one they want. And they said no, because that's unfair, because everyone's going to love this project and not the one we want. So we don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to go right to two questions from the audience, both of which are related to what you've been talking about and related to communications and information flow. The first from Susan Chin, who's principal and founder at Design Connects, and who you may remember is executive director of the Design Trust for Public Space here in New York. Also best AI New York president. Susan says, we've got, quote unquote, we've got over 7,000 miles of this type of infrastructure across the country. And I totally agree with P3 is the only way to upgrade the system. Then comes the however. However, after your two earnest tries, what would you now recommend to Secretary Buttigieg and Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg at DOT nationally, and to the designers? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of federal money for infrastructure now that there might not have been when you started this project. Is there any thought in recalibrating the P3 to make the public side more more predominant.
Well, some initial thoughts would be, if the money came from federal sources through grants, I mean, as the person behind all this, my most desired outcome is that it gets implemented. Whether it's implemented through federal money or private money or county money is not the relevant issue. The point I'm trying to make with everyone I meet is we need to do it comprehensively so that we don't just do Band-Aid approaches for decades because they don't result in a benefit. So my take would be, you know, and by the way, I met Buttigieg. I was supporting him as best I could during his run, and I was really impressed with him. I think one thing that would be interested is for the feds through their funding to hire consulting firms and financing firms that could begin to identify setting up the P3, because the time it took to create the project, to design the project, to think about all the implications, to deal with the resiliency and coastal issues, that's time that could be taken through Buttigieg funding to actually start identifying where are the projects that would result in the most impact for being able to take this 7,000 miles of infrastructure and convert it into something that's going to be more meaningful, with the idea of that work being a solicitation for a P3. So you could actually use that money to save 2 years in identifying, thinking through, and designing the basic parameters for what would constitute it. And then the rest of the funding for the implementation would have to follow the design guidelines of that work. And then the P3 is really there to implement and fund. And I think that would be an interesting thing to do. The other is if the feds came down here and said, we think this is a model project, we want to get our money behind it, even if we still put it out as a P3, I think it would be really hard for the mayor of the county or anyone else here to resist the idea that this could be a phenomenal, intervention into the city. Yeah. And I think that might help overcome some of the local politics. The reason that these communities have the impact they have is for two reasons, in my view. One is they have a lot of money funding campaigns, and they have residents who will be irate if the county does something against them, which they perceive to be their unanimous vote at the council of the village. So, but if you had federal money that said, look, we're behind this idea and we want to put it out there because we think this is a valuable project, I think that would overcome the local stuff. I mean, one of the problems we're having here in Miami is the state of Florida, through our governor, no comment, is basically trying to undermine everything local and make it under the auspices of the state. I would personally celebrate if the federal government came in and told the state they have no authority here because the federal government's going to come in. I think that would be awesome for Miami. So
yeah, I wasn't going to bring up
so.
politics or politicians more than I already did, but it occurs to me that DeSantis, whether he's announced or not, is candidate for president, and perhaps so is Francis Sanchez, the mayor of Miami, is a moderate Republican who doesn't particularly get along with DeSantis, but voted for him, I'm told. Well, all that to say, is a lot of federal money going to come to Miami or to the state of Florida anytime soon? I don't know, wishful thinking, but there's a second question in the chat room from Damu Radheshwar, which is very specific, but I'm going to broaden it a little bit. I'll read the question and then broaden it. So much of time and effort that you've spent, it's daunting. My community, this is Radheshwar speaking, in the town of Brookhaven, is to replace the existing drawbridge over the Great South Bay. And the current proposal is totally utilitarian with the shared bike and pedestrian path. Evidently, this individual has tried to comment about the safety aspects of combining different modes of circulation, including, as we saw in the Brooklyn Bridge for so many years, bikes and pedestrians. And there's been no response. The question is who and how and who should this individual speak with? I would broaden that to say that wherever there is conflicts of circulation, we see it in New York and other cities with scooters now as well. How does the logic of separation set in? How can designers and architects, landscape architects, urban designers talk to the safety issues attendant to separating different modes of transportation when, maybe traffic engineers and others, are prone to combine things for economy or spatial reasons? Not just who could this individual speak with, but how could they could be more convincing in what they say and do?
Well, I think, it's a great question, and I've been grappling with that myself, because the response tends to be that only the drivers, maybe that's too big a statement, but most of the resistance comes from the fact that the perception is the roadways are designed for drivers, and they don't want to be held up, and they don't want to, have to like spend all this time in traffic. But the truth is, at least in my experience, most of us are also drivers. It's not like we don't drive. It's just that, wouldn't it be great if we could take some of that right-of-way and begin to be more equitable in how we distribute the right-of-way? So the idea is not to take anything away from the driver, but to add opportunity so that the cyclist and the pedestrian and the runner and the mom with the carriage taking her baby out, all those people also have an opportunity. So I would say that, first of all, there's an equity issue in terms of the fact that we need to stop thinking of ourselves as cyclists and runners and think of ourselves simply as people, because as people, I know for me, I don't run anymore because of obvious reasons. As you get older, your joints don't take it so well, but I still ride the bike and I still want to be outside, but I also drive. And we all do almost all of it. So I would say, number one, approach it from the standpoint of equity. Number two, see who it is that's responsible to replace that bridge in Brookhaven. If it's a state project, you need to get to the DOT of that state and ask them what their policies are on multimodal construction, especially within urban areas. If it's a suburban or a rural area, might be a little more difficult, because at that point in time, the design speeds are bigger and people are really trying to go longer distances. But if it's a municipal bridge or a county bridge, then you need to go to somebody else and say, look at the opportunity here to get cars off the road. Your mission is to make driving freer. What better way than to get that driver on a bike and have him do his 1 or 2 mile or 5 mile ride instead of getting in the car? So, the funny thing is, here in South Florida, we're starting to get traction on those arguments. DOT is willing to consider streets that have bike lanes and ped lanes. But other parts of the country, I know it's a lot more difficult. So I would approach it from the standpoint of equity, and then I would look to see who is actually responsible for the bridge replacement and go to the head of that jurisdiction and make the case.
Good answer. I have one last question, since we're at time, and it occurs to me that one of the films that we probably both saw more or less the same time when it came out in 1969 was called Z, which was a political thriller. The parallels with Plan Z for Miami are too many to take the time to discuss now. But what the political slogan coming out of that thriller, that real life saga of assassination in Greece, Z evidently colloquially meant he lives. Despite the political murder that took place a few years before the film was made. Does this plan still have legs? Is it alive? Are you optimistic that something can happen that will keep it going and keep the logic of the resilience aspects, the open space aspects happening?
The answer is yes. The reason I had the lessons learned is I realized those are things in retrospect I wish we had done differently. I didn't know the extent of the power that comes from the resistance from such a small group. So I'm now currently in the process of trying to see who we can partner with or retain to help us understand how to better promote the benefits through social media, and also politically how we can give courage to the elected officials so that they can resist the eventual clamoring that comes from a small group, so that they can actually put into place what's better for the greater community and not cave in to the complaints of small groups. And I think, you know, it means hiring lobbyists and getting involved in all kinds of things that have nothing at all to do with what we communally do as designers and architects. You know, we have a very kind of Pollyanna view of the world. It's obvious that this is good. How can anybody be against this? Well, you know, you're not paying for it. It solves all the problems. It can all be done quickly. What is the problem here? Well, somebody found a problem and they were able to stop it. So we have to figure out how to unwind that. And if I get a positive response that during this administration and potentially the next, that there will be a moment in time within the next year that we can begin to turn the social opinion in our direction, then I believe there's a way to put this out again. If it turns out that that's not possible and the political will just isn't there, then I'll be calling you up and say, hey, let's find a new project, because I feel like this is the future that I'm interested in. I want to use our firm and our status and our funding, frankly, to help produce something that's going to give lasting value. If I can't do it here in town, I'll look for somewhere else. But I'm definitely motivated to do that.
Oh, great conclusion. Thank you, Bernard. And I also want to thank you. You mentioned her name already, Grace Padoma, for help with presentation, and thank Chitra Mamadela for hosting this, getting it set up, and particularly welcome Jana Botsas, who's joined the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization today as the one salaried employee in a poor not-for-profit.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you all.
Congratulations.
And,
yes.
And thank you all for staying with us till the end. And I hope this helps to bring some light to the project for people who weren't familiar with it. And maybe there are people on the call who could be of some assistance.
If there's anyone on the call that can help figure out how we can move this forward, you know, contact Rick or Chitra. They know how to reach me, and I will be eternally grateful for any help. Thank you.
Thank you again, Bernard, and thank you all.
Bye.